Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Kit Mead, ASAN's Technical Assistance Coordinator. I am the organizer of the webinar. Today's topic is building or rebuilding a state advocacy organization, which was first presented by People First in Nebraska on March 22nd, and now they're presenting it to you. Our presenters are Travis Schaefer, the People First Nebraska Vice President, Kathy Cole, the People First Nebraska State Advisor and Parliamentarian, and Kelly Ellerbush, People First Nebraska Lead Staff Support. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Travis, Kathy, and Kelly.
Okay, this is Kelly Ellerbush, and I'm going to start off with a little background of where People First of Nebraska was in 2012 when I joined into the organization. People First of Nebraska was one of the original People First state organizations in the country and had been pretty active for a long time, but in the early 2000s it started to kind of wane and lose its mission. It had an advisor that was not really allowing the self-advocates to run their own organization. And so the state planning council, who provided funding to People First, asked for Power Up to come and do a site review of the organization. They are a project of the Human Services Research Institute, and there's a link there if anyone is interested in talking to them about an evaluation. They talked to all of the officers, they talked to other stakeholders in the state, and did an assessment of the organization, and then made recommendations for us on how to improve People First in Nebraska. You can go to the next slide.
And hi, this is Kathy Hall. So anyway, going back to the end of 2012, 2013, the person that was their state advisor quit less than 6 weeks before the convention. He just walked into a meeting one day and just was there 15 minutes and just walked right back out. So no one knew what had been done. They didn't know what they were supposed to do. They came to find out the presentations had been the same year after year. People First, as Kelly said, had been around a long time. Used to have a lot of membership, but it became more of a social club rather than an advocacy organization. And so they lost a lot of members. And, the convention attendance was dropping, morale was low. A number of the local chapters dissolved. Some of the officers and advisors quit. It was a lot going on. Change slides, please. Anyway, so the officers and the board did not know what their roles and responsibilities were. The meetings were actually quite boring. The state advisor in the past and some of the chapters advisors had actually written scripts for them, told them what they could say, what they could not say. The advisors handpicked the officers. There were no new leaders being developed. So the board was very divided and fighting amongst themselves. And the thing that really bothered me was bylaws had not been updated since 1984. And there was way too much drama. I don't like drama in my life. Change slides, please.
Travis?
Oh, sorry. New chapters organized for many years, no new chapters organized for many years. No, communication between chapters. Little support from other disability groups. PFN had no credibility or perceived value. Let's see. We did not press any financial, what?
You got it. We didn't possess any financial
or organizational records. No money and invoices not submitted or payments. Grant, what is that? Applications 3 months past due. So.
Okay, you can go to the next. So, as Travis said, the organization was in really bad shape. I think there was less than $200 in the bank account. And so the first thing that happened is we had our People First convention in October. So the first thing we did was ask all of the membership to come to a meeting on Saturday afternoon. And we asked them what they wanted their organization to be like, what they were concerned about, and if they had suggestions. And the organization, the membership, was very vocal in what they wanted and how they wanted to make changes. And we used their suggestions to write the goals of the grant application to the Planning Council, which was kind enough to give us an extension for the grant. We also asked members to fill out a written survey to find out from some people that maybe aren't comfortable speaking in public, and they gave us even more suggestions and ideas. And then we did a lot of research online looking at how other successful self-advocacy groups were operating. We got copies of other states' officer roles, their mission statements, their recruiting materials, and I wanted to send a shout out to People First in Missouri because they have a lot of great information available on the internet. Next.
Okay.
Kathy?
Yeah. The next thing the officers did, though, was to reach out to allies in other organizations. And actually, I am one of those allies that they brought in. Also the executive director of the statewide Independent Living Council. And they asked me to be one of their advisors. So anyway, all of the advisors and volunteers. We now have 3 advisors. And some organization brought in resources and done different things to support the organization. One of the things we found is that the books were in really bad shape. So we got a CPA that was a physical guardian for one of our officers, and she volunteered to audit the books, and she continues to do the financial management for the group. There were also some HR issues, and we had an attorney who volunteered. He was a friend of the attorney for one of our advisors, family business. And so he volunteered to help resolve those issues. Change the slide, please.
So after we had the conference, we called an emergency meeting of all of the officers. And the attorney who had been helping us with our issue with our employee had done some research, and he made some, gave some suggestions to the officers, and then they made a decision about how they wanted to handle that employee situation. The accountant submitted a financial audit report, so we had some idea of where we were financially. And since the vice president had resigned, the board appointed a new vice president, which was Travis, who's on the webinar today. The officers spent a lot of time talking about what the organization needed, and then prioritized what should be done. They've appointed committees to take care of different tasks, including new bylaws and the next convention, developing some materials for recruitment, and then how to run nominations and elections in the future, because they had not been done democratically in the past. Then the next thing they decided was to hire a new support person, which would not be an advisor like it had been in the past, but an actual staff person who would take direction from the board and support the board. So the board selected the committee, and they developed a job description, and they also developed some interview questions. They put out a call for applications, and in May of 2013, they met and interviewed 3 candidates. They asked all the questions, debated all of the different candidates, and hired a staff support person that day. Next slide, please. Travis?
Okay. The president, due to illness, resigned. Welcome, President Travis. Bylaws were unmanageable. Supported or suspended until new ones were addressed. We use Robert's Rules of Order in the meantime. Staff support person was let go. I can't read that. What is it? expectations not being met, discussions made without contact the other officers or board. Officers made the difficult decision and decided the new we decided to let her go.
Yeah, exactly. And that was probably the first big challenge for the officers taking charge of their organization, because the staff support person was she was a very nice person. She just wasn't doing the things the way the board wanted her to, and so they chose to let her go. Go ahead to the next slide. So the board decided, you know, this we're now in October of 2013, and so the board decided that it was time to look at what we were doing and make some adjustments. And we all kind of decided that the job of staff support was just really too big for one person. And so we needed a person to handle just like the administrative office stuff, and we needed another person to be a recruiter. We had several chapters in eastern Nebraska, but none in western Nebraska. Nebraska is a very large state. It's 500 miles east to west, and we really needed some chapters out on the western side of the state. So the officers decided to divide the duties of the staff support person, and myself and a lady from central Nebraska applied for the job together. And we interviewed with the officers, which was kind of weird because we knew everybody so well. But they were pretty tough interviewers. They had a lot of questions about how we would do things differently than they'd been done in the past. And they also kind of knew our weaknesses too. So they asked us how we would work to better those. And so they hired us. And now I also work for the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. And so my organization was supportive of my work with People First, and our goals kind of aligned as far as self-advocacy and self-determination. So that's a good partnership. One of the first things we did was develop a new brochure to recruit new members. And this is when I got another lesson in what self-determination really is. Our committee had written up some language for a brochure, but we hadn't gotten it done in time to meet our goal with our grant. So I just went ahead and finished it and submitted it to the grantor to show the progress we were making. But what I did really was take away the voice of the self-advocates running the organization, and I got called on it, and they were right and I was wrong, and I apologized, and we fixed the brochure, and it's just another lesson for me. I learn them all the time because I make mistakes a lot, but that was the learning experience for me and for the board to kind of call me out on my mistake. So then the next thing we did was develop a display board. You can see the picture of it here. And you can see 3 of our officers who were at this event with me talking to people about our organization. And what we did was ask other disability organizations to give us free booth space at their conferences and meetings. They often can charge several $100s, but we were able to get them to give us some space for free so we could get our name out into the community. Next slide. Kathy, I think this is you.
I'm sorry. So anyway, fast forward 3 years, and now we actually are holding elections the way they're supposed to be held, openly, honestly, and they're actually being elected, nominated by the members of People First. New officers and new board members receive training on their roles and responsibilities. And I think the biggest thing is they're learning how to disagree with something, but then to compromise while still remaining positive about resolving an issue. They adopted new bylaws, and they actually followed them. I'm a very anal person, and I make sure I say something if they try not to. The convention, they're still holding those, but the price has actually gone down from what they were charging before. So it's become more affordable. They're bringing in some national speakers, and the attendance is growing every year. And one of the rules that they made when all this was happening was that the convention presentations, they must be co-presented with a person with a disability. And the person with a disability has to be an active participatory member, or the presentation will never get approved. Change slides, please. Anyway, so to continue, other organizations are now providing a significant financial support for the convention. The University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, RPNA, here in Nebraska, is actually they're providing money to People First for the officers to help bring in speakers, whatever they need to do. And they're inviting the officers to participate and present at other conferences and panels, and to serve on various boards or committees within the state. There's now over $20,000 in the bank. They've grown from 9 local chapters to 13 local chapters, and they expect to get some more in this spring or early summer. There has been some cross-pollination between chapters and advocates in other states. They're working with the Harlan Self-Advocacy Network, which is where this presentation was presented for the first time. These are self-advocates in Kansas, Iowa, and Missouri, as well as Nebraska. And this summer they will be going to the Self-Advocacy Coalition Kansas Conference, then also a leadership center in Kansas in August. Next slide, please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kelly. You go ahead.
Okay, so now we have 3 support staff people, one in Eastern Nebraska, me, one in Central, and one in Western Nebraska. And we're all working to organize new chapters and support existing chapters. In fact, I'm going to Fremont, Nebraska tonight for the third meeting of a new chapter there. And we're just finding that there are people been waiting for this to happen, and once they see it happening, they're ready to jump in and organize and help support. The Planning Council, which had originally cut our funding in 2012 and 13, increased the funding this year by $7,000 to help pay for transportation for chapters to attend our quarterly board meetings and to support members going to national and regional conferences, which is so important for self-advocates to see what's happening in other states and nationally. We have a Facebook page now that actually hit 350 followers this weekend, and we have a website that we haven't quite launched it yet because we had to postpone a board meeting, but it'll be open in the next couple weeks, I'm hoping, and we ask you all to go to peoplefirstnebraska.com. A lot of the resources that we talk about that we've developed will be available there, plus a lot more information. Can you go to the next slide? Kathy?
Okay. Anyway, so where people will, of course, will go in the future. The organization has more visibility within the disability community and in general. They have more participation in statewide activities by local members, chapter members, not just board members. More of the advocates are going at disability training, committees, working groups, etc. Kelly, you actually know more about this than I do. Name them and shame them, because they did it so well. You want to talk about that?
Well, one of the goals, like we said at our convention, is that we only accept presentations that have people with disabilities as co-presenters. And we were finding that there were a lot of disability organizations in the state doing trainings, conferences, presentations about people with disabilities, but there was not even one person in the room with a disability, let alone a presenter. And, you know, we just don't believe that that's acceptable anymore. When we talk about nothing about us without us, that's exactly what self-advocates mean. And if people are doing that and making excuses, then they need to be informed that that's just not acceptable anymore. We also find that some disability groups will invite self-advocates to come to meetings or do presentations, but they don't pay them like they pay other professionals. And that is also not acceptable because self-advocates are experts in their field. So that is something else that we're working hard to make people aware of. The other thing that we're looking at is more training and support for advisors. A lot of people, you know, agree to be an advisor to a group out of the goodness of their heart, but they may not really know how to support advocates without taking over the meeting or taking over the agenda. And, you know, like I talked about what I did with the brochure, you know, advisors need to have the self-awareness to know when they're crossing the line, and they need to be able to apologize and correct themselves when they're making a mistake. So next slide, please. Travis, do you want to do this?
Yeah, I could do this. Start with the membership. Not what is that?
Professionals.
Professionals, parts, advisors or other disability organizations, if it's not working, ask yourself who is running the show and setting the agenda. Thank you.
Okay.
Get the activities.
Advocate.
Oh yeah. Get the advocates from and current information. Excuse me. Get the advocates front and center immediately.
Travis, I'm going to interrupt just a second. Sorry. I just want to emphasize the first one because I was talking to a self-advocate in another state, and he was telling me, well, the planning council won't let us do this. They won't let us organize a state organization. And that's why we say it's got to start with the membership. You know, there may be no organization that wants to step up and help, but it's about the membership, and so they need to take that action first and show other disability organizations that they are capable of advocating for themselves. And if it's not working, then it's probably because somebody else is running the show and not the self-advocates. So I'm sorry, Travis, could you go ahead with number 3?
Yeah. Identify your strengths and weaknesses. An outside what is that? Evaluator can help. Find advisors, supporters who can address these needs and share your values of self-determination. Focus on leadership trainings and experience, not just advocacy training. Next slide.
So I would suggest that people consider, if they're in a position that they can pay for some support staff, that they consider contracting for staff support instead of hiring someone. That's what People First of Nebraska is doing. They contract with me to provide services. They don't have to pay any payroll taxes or benefits. It gives them more flexibility, so if I'm not doing my job, they are able to end my contract or subcontract when they need to. And this option also attracts other disability organizations that can provide other resources. Like I'm with the University Center, so they provide us office space, computer, telephone, copier, all those meeting spaces, all those other things. So it's a really nice partnership. And then get rid of your shyness a little bit and go out and ask other disability organizations to support you. It's really their duty, and it's probably in everybody's mission to support disability advocates. And we found that many were just waiting to be asked. Like I said, nothing about me without me is not just a catchy phrase for people to use. Now, not every organization has money that they can donate, Some people will donate meeting space for board meetings or materials that we need. They'll donate speakers at our conferences that don't charge us any fees. So there are lots of ways that other organizations can support you. And I also want to let you know that you can make a big impact with a small amount of money if it's a good idea. And I wanted to give you an example if you go to the next slide. We developed and had them printed. There are 4 posters. One is the audience is neighbors and people in the community. The green one is to service providers. The blue one is for healthcare providers and therapists. And then the red one talks about what self-advocates look like and how to support a self-advocate. All of the comments on these posters were made by people with disabilities. We collected them at our convention, and we drafted up these posters, and then we showed them to our board, and they had an incredible response. And if you can read them, they say things like, support and advise me, but know that I make choices about me. Remember, this is my home, not yours. I'm an adult. Treat me like one. Help me learn about my health so I can make better decisions. So we have these posters printed up, and we gave a supply to each of our chapters. And the members in the chapters went out and distributed them in their communities. They took them to their doctor, their dentist, their physical therapist, their speech therapist. They took them to their residential providers and their work employment coaches. They took them to libraries and gyms and community centers, and they took them to their jobs and distributed them all across the state. And we've actually run through 3 printings of them now, and they are being translated into Spanish so that we can reach a broader audience. So not only do they send out the message about self-advocacy and self-determination, they got our name out there for the first time in a long time. And I have seen these posters pop up everywhere. So it's a very economical and effective way to get your name and your message out. We go to the next slide. Kathy?
So anyway, yeah, one of the things that was very apparent when this organization was down and almost out, but not quite, there was no transparency in the financial procedures. Right now, staff does not have access to the bank account. Bills are sent to our CPA. They maintain the books, they write the checks, and then the checks are signed by one of the officers and one of the advisors. We also are, when a new chapter starts, we give them, I think it's around $100, so they can get their own bank account, they have their own money, and they can get a free federal employee identification number. And we have included the link here for anybody who's interested in doing that. And Kelly, I'm sure, would help you. Need help going through that process. And we needed to make sure that this chapter were independent, because at one time in the past, chapters of People First were made to operate by other organizations, by laws, and
and bank accounts.
We didn't want them to be influenced by any of the providers or the parents. They openly nominate an electoral officer, adopt their own bylaws, set their goals and objectives. Next slide, please.
So I also wanted to make you aware of resources that we found very helpful with our organization, because there's no sense recreating things when there's really good products out there. The Heartland Resource Network is kind of a sister project to your Pacific Self-Advocacy Project. It's a grant from the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And it has a website with great resources. Like I said before, People First of Missouri has a great website. All of their materials for their officers and their board are all written by self-advocates. So it's very nice. The Self-Advocate Coalition of Kansas has some great resources. They actually have PowerPoints of different presentations they do that are available online. People First of West Virginia have some nice stuff there. The National Gateway to Self-Determination website is a national grant-funded project. And then the next one, the Resource Center for Supported Decision Making. I also included a link to a private conference call system that has been really helpful to us since we're such a big state and there's so much travel involved. All of our committee work and some of our other meetings are run through a conference call system. And this AT conference call system offers a really nice discount to nonprofit organizations. There's no subscription fee. You only pay for the time you use. And like I said, they give us a pretty good rate. So if you're having trouble getting people together for meetings, this is a nice way to solve that problem. Next slide, please. So I also want to offer anybody out there who's building or rebuilding a state organization some of our products that we've developed. Our grant applications to the Planning Council, bylaws, any of our promotional material or staff support materials, and also the process we use to manage our financials. We have a few fundraising ideas. We can also provide technical support to you. We're just a phone call away. Next slide.
Okay, we're going to open up for questions, I guess. Let me unmute people. Okay, does anyone have questions for Kelly, Travis, and Kathy?
Wow, we must be really good.
Hold on, there's a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have the goals and issues you've worked on changed since the shift?
Anybody want it? Do you want me to handle that? Because our first year or two was really focused on rebuilding our organization, recruiting new chapters and getting officers trained to fulfill their roles. And I think probably in the last year or so, Travis, wouldn't you say we're talking more about what People First is going to do in the community?
Yeah, I would think so.
and we're doing it more leader, like it's like a PowerPoint said, we're focusing more on leadership training now and not just advocacy training. Does that answer your question? It really did take some time to rebuild the organization itself, and but like the Planning Council and all, they were very good to give us that time to do that. So.
Someone asked, do you have nonprofit status, and if so, was it hard?
We do have nonprofit status. That was done actually prior to 2012. I know it can be, there's a lot of paperwork, and there again, I would encourage people to find perhaps an attorney that would volunteer a little bit of their time to help go over the paperwork with you. I don't think it's hard. It's just paperwork that has to be done right, and so it can be a little time consuming. But it is
and someone's asking me a question about if they can get the PowerPoint in read-only mode. I'm assuming you are comfortable with like putting the PowerPoint on the website and stuff, or just a link to it.
Is that okay with you, Travis, if they put the PowerPoint up on their website?
Yeah.
And with credit, of course.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. We have a few more minutes if anyone has more questions. Cool, now it's not letting me click on questions. This is great.
Hello, this is Trina. When you got your or when you reformatted and restructured your organization, did you have to go in and change your nonprofit status when you updated your bylaws?
Kathy, you want to take that?
No, we did not, because when they originally filed for their status, the rules of incorporation were actually in line with what we needed now. They were in non-compliance before. So everything actually on that end did work out. But yeah, we had to look at that stuff.
That's why it's so nice to have someone in your organization that knows how nonprofit organizations are, and Kathy has been a fantastic resource for us.
And I had gone through this with my own, with the statewide independent living council. So that wasn't that long ago. So I had already dealt with some of these issues back then.
So yeah, when the organization went out to look for advisors, you'll always find people that'll say, "Oh yeah, I'd like to help," but I think it's important to find advisors that have the skills you need. Like I said, I'm really good at organizational stuff. Kathy's great at the rules and regulations. One of our other advisors has been a chapter advisor for a long time, so she knows the history of the organization. So, you need to find people that have the expertise you need, and not just people that want, are nice and want to help out. I mean, that's good, but you really need people with skills and resources.
However, when they did start out, when they first lost their staff person, the one thing was, I am a person with a disability. So they wanted to make sure there was a person with a disability because whenever there is a problem, like when Kelly rewrote their brochure, they come to me and they complain to me, and it's like, I've got to be the one to tell them, no, we have to have a discussion about it, and you need to share with Kelly your feelings. And they were able to do that.
Well, I don't think anyone has any more questions unless Trina has another one.
Trina always has questions, but I'd like to thank you guys for this presentation. This has been great.
Yeah, no problem.
I know a lot of the groups here in
fun.
California have been struggling about recruiting new members. So if you have any tips or suggestions about membership, would love to hear them.
Well, I'm not the main recruiter, although I have been working with a new chapter up north of Omaha, but I think what has worked best for us is the staff person who is working on recruitment always takes a People First member with her to meet with new organizations. And that makes the people with disabilities in the new chapter feel a lot more comfortable because they don't know how a meeting is run, and so he's there to kind of help them and sit beside them, and it makes them feel a lot more comfortable, and I think it makes them realize that they're in charge. So again, with everything else, don't try to do anything without self-advocates front and center. And I think that makes a big impact on other people with disabilities. When they see people like them doing it, then they feel that they can too.
And
So
the other,
you currently have one staff member or two?
Actually, we have
that are
three.
actually getting paid. And how many of those people have disabilities?
Of the three staff support people, I know one, and I never really asked Kendra.
You have disability.
Okay. Two.
and we do have our next webinar that's scheduled actually is on growing membership.
Great, we will want to see that.
Yeah, it's going to be run by our the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network's Boston Community Coordinator, who's also the chapter leader of ASA in Boston. So I think we can start wrapping up.
All right.
So thank everyone. I'd like to thank Travis, Kelly, and Kathy for presenting this webinar, and I would like to thank everyone who came for coming, and hope to see you at future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
All right, thanks, Travis.
Yep. Thank you, Kelly.
Hey, it's
Thanks,
great
Kat.
talking to you guys again. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. I'm ending the webinar.